who are here will get a copy. Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome. This webinar is hosted by Devant. It is our live immigration Q&A, and today we're going to be talking about extensions as well as traveling. My name is Sisha Maharaj. I am your host today. I'm a senior consultant, business development and external relations with Devant, and my role is to bring in employers and host our virtual events with our expert speakers on a monthly basis. But in addition to myself, here is my team on the right-hand side. We have an amazing team of professionals here to support you in your job search and success in Canada. And we also have 40 student ambassadors this year. I'm so happy to see all of you. Welcome. Next slide, please. So before we get started, just a little bit of logistics. All of you are muted, so there's no need to use your video. This session is being recorded and will be shared only with those who have attended. You are encouraged to use the Q&A for your questions. We have an expert immigration lawyer with us this evening, and I will prioritize your Q&A in the Q&A feature. And also, if you want to see future events, you can take a look at www.devant.ca. We have all of our upcoming events listed there for you. So before we start, I do want to acknowledge the land on which I am residing today for this webinar. The region of Durham exists on lands that the Mishisha, Sagig, Anishapeg inhabited for thousands of years prior to European colonization. These lands are the traditional and treaty territories of the nations covered under the Williams Treaties, including the Mississauga of Scugog Island First Nation, Alderville First Nation, Hiawatha First Nation, Curve Lake First Nation, and the Chippewa Nations of Georgina Island, Beausoleil, and Rama. I honor, recognize, and respect Indigenous peoples as the right holders and stewards of the lands and waters on which we have the privilege to live. In our efforts on reconciliation, we continue to build and strengthen relationships with First Nations, as well as the large Métis communities and growing Inuit communities here in Durham. Myself, as a second generation newcomer, my parents are both newcomers to Canada. I just want to say that I welcome all of you and want to make sure that we recognize and commit to Indigenous learning of their values, knowledge, and building opportunities for collaboration, and to remember that we are all connected. So next slide, please. For those of you who are new to Devant, Devant works with over 55,000 international students and newcomers to help you get hired in Canada. We offer free actionable advice from career coaches and industry experts at our live events. We offer the latest AI-driven tools to help you polish your resume, interview skills, and labor market knowledge. We work with many universities and colleges as well as non-for-profits. So please go onto our website and hit the login page where you can log in and get access for free, and also to work with your own career centers to support you in your career advancement in Canada. Next slide, please. Just an important notice that this information does not constitute legal advice. Please refer to Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada for the most up-to-date information and consult a registered immigration professional for personalized advice. Next slide. So welcome to Elizabeth Long, our expert. She is a certified specialist in immigration law. We're very fortunate to partner with Elizabeth and her firm. And just for those of you who have not met Elizabeth yet, she is a leading immigration lawyer in Canada. She's an active advocate of immigrants, refugee rights in Canada, and frequently presents and advises on immigration issues to organizations, universities, members of parliament, unions, and the media. She has also testified several times before the Parliamentary Standing Committee of Citizenship and Immigration on various immigration policies. She holds a Juris Doctor law degree from the University of Toronto and a Bachelor of Arts degree with honors in psychology from Memorial University in Newfoundland. She also holds a Master of Law degree from Osgoode Hall Law School, York University, where she focused on the intersection between immigration and labor and employment law for foreign workers. Very important to note, Elizabeth has been certified by the Law Society of Ontario as a specialist in citizenship and immigration law, a prestigious list of which only 65 lawyers in Canada belong. She also speaks Mandarin and English. So please join me in giving Elizabeth a very warm welcome. Elizabeth, thank you again so much for being here with us this evening. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to be here with you guys every few weeks. So every week we try to do a little bit of different kinds of education moments for you all. And today we're going to be talking about two topics. They're not going to be too long, but they're super important. The first one that we wanted to touch upon is the extending your status. Now, there is a lot of misunderstanding and confusion out there due to this letter that I've put on this slide. It's what the IRCC says it's WP-EXT, the work permit extension letter. Okay. Now, whoever came up with the idea of this letter had the best of intentions. They wanted to provide this letter to you so that you could bring it to your health authority, like OHIP in Ontario, or BC Health, or anywhere in your province, and it would help them give you your interim health care. They also thought that this was a good idea for you to then show this letter to your employer to show that you have status. Now, you probably get from my tone that I don't necessarily think that this was the best idea. The reason why I don't think that this is the best idea is because of this particular sentence that you'll see in the second paragraph here. It says, please attach this letter to your present work permit number, that's fine, as proof that you are authorized to continue working under the same conditions as your original work permit until, and they put a random date here. Normally it's probably 6 months from the date that you submitted your application, or until a decision is made on your application, whichever is first. Now, most people, when they're reading this, take from this that whoever has submitted their application only has status until this random date. Right? Wrong. And that's why this is one of my biggest pet peeves with IRCC, is the fact that this wording is very, very confusing. Because you have implied status, you have the legal right to continue to work in Canada until a decision is made. If you submitted your application before the expiry of your work permit or your student status. Note, I didn't say study permit. I said student status, because you lose your student status when 90 days after you've completed your studies, or if your study permit has expired. Okay? So notice here that I don't have a date. That is because there is no date in which you would lose your status if a decision has not made. You don't lose your status until a decision is made. And sometimes, now, most of the time, a decision probably would be made within 6 months. But a lot of times, decisions are not made within 6 months. And even if a decision is made after this random date that IRCC would have put it into this calendar, you have the legal right to continue to be in Canada, to work until a decision is made. Some people mistakenly think that this letter gives them status. No, this letter does not give you the status. The law gives you status. The regulations give you status. And under the regulations, you have the right to stay in Canada until you get a decision. Now, the only thing that you have to remember is that if you are under implied status, when are you under implied status? You are under implied status if your previous status has ended and you don't have a new work permit yet. Okay, so if your previous status ended, you don't have a new work permit or study permit ended yet, then that in-between time is called implied status. You can stay in Canada, but the minute you leave Canada, guess what? Your implied status is over. And some people can say, well, I can come back. I have a visa, or I don't even need a visa. I can come back. Perhaps you might be able to be let back in. But even if you do, you would no longer be able to work or study, okay, based on your previous document, because your implied status is broken the minute you leave Canada. And it doesn't matter, even if this letter, even if you come back before this date on this letter, you break implied status the minute that you leave, okay? Let me repeat again. Your status does not end on the date of the work permit extension letter. And if you don't really say, well, where are you going to see this? It's in the regulations, but you can also go to this link, and we will be sending out the slides to everyone who has registered as well, okay? And you can click on this link and show your employer that your status has not ended yet. And also, a lot of people ask, well, what about my social insurance number? My social insurance number expires when my study permit or my work permit expires. Yes, that's true. The expiry of it is correlating with your work permit or study permit. However, when you renew your work permit, you'll be using the same number. You'll just extend the expiry date of your social insurance number. So according to the CRA, you can still be paid under payroll with the same social insurance number, even when you are under implied status. And I have put a link here as well that you can also refer to, and probably tell your employer as well when they're wondering about this. Okay. All right. Now, I wanted to talk about next thing is the restoration of status. So what if you forgot to extend your status in time? Shoot. Sometimes it's just a matter of a few hours. You know, if you applied even on the day that it expires, the IRCC website says 30 days. That's a recommendation. Again, that's not the law. The law is as long as you apply before your status expires. So even if you applied on the day of, you're still okay. But a few hours later, when it's the next day, your restoration of status, you would have lost status. So what happens then? Okay. You have 90 days from the time that you've lost your status to file the restoration of status. So when do you lose your status? Well, if you did not apply for the extension in time, when did you lose status? You would have lost your status from the date that your student status or your work permit expires. Okay, so you start counting 90 days from that date. But let's say you applied for an extension, but the application was rejected. Okay, then when does the date start counting? Well, if you had implied status, you applied, but the application was rejected, you still have your status until the date of your refusal. So the 90 days starts counting from the date of your refusal, even if the date of refusal is long after your work permit or study permit expired. Now, what if you forgot to pay the right fees, or you didn't submit the right form? What happens then? Well, if that happened and your application was returned, not refused, returned, then it's as if you had never submitted an application at all. So then the expiry dates of that you have to start counting of your status for the 90 days would be when your student status or your work permit expired. So the same thing as the situation for number one. All right, now let's talk about traveling. A lot of people, you finished your studies. Now, finally, I want to go home. I want to travel, see the world a little bit before I get down to the grind and want to work. So, can I travel? That's one of the most common questions we get in these kind of webinars. Well, first of all, if you want to travel, you have to make sure you have the documents. What documents do you need? If you're Americans, you just need your passport. You don't need an ETA, you don't need a visa. Some countries, you don't need a visa to come to Canada. Then you just need your ETA. Now, it's the visa requiring nationals that are the most confusing. It's not that you're most confused. It's just that your situation is the most confusing. Okay, because the law actually does allow, even if you're visa requiring, for you to be able to travel. If you're only going to the US and you're coming back, you don't even need a visa if you have a valid work permit or study permit. Okay, so if you're just traveling over to the US, you can come back with your valid work permit or study permit. But if you are traveling outside of the US, your TRV, your temporary resident visa, will need to be valid in order to come back. Okay. Now, I just want to be very clear that your TRV, your visa, is not the same as your work permit or study permit. Some people refer to things like a work visa or study visa. Those are very American terms. In Canada, you get a work permit or study permit. And for those people who need a visa, so the work permit and study permit, that's your colorful piece of paper, right? The visa is that thing that's on your passport. And if you're from a country that needs a visa, that visa is a separate document from your work permit. Now, when you applied for your first study permit, you would have been requested to submit your passport, and a visa would have been attached to your passport together with your letter of introduction, and then you came to the border and you got your study permit at the border. Okay, but when you're applying for a work permit in Canada, or when you're applying to extend your study permit in Canada, guess what? Does anyone ask you for your passport? No, they don't. They send you the study permit or work permit in the mail. So then what happens to your visa? Well, you have to apply to extend your visa to get another visa if your visa is going to expire. Probably it did, along with the expiry date of your first study permit. Now you have a new study permit or work permit, then you apply to extend your visa according to, and usually it'll be given to the expiry date of your new work permit or study permit. Sometimes people say, well, can I just apply for a visa even if I don't have a new work permit? You could, but there's a chance that it might be rejected because you don't have temporary status for a long time anymore. Normally, what we suggest is you go and apply for your work permit, study permit, and when it is issued, then you go and apply for your TRV. Okay, so when can you travel? Well, when you are not on implied status. Please don't travel when you're on implied status. Why not? Because what did I tell you before? If you leave when you're on implied status, when you come back, like you break your implied status, you wouldn't be able to study or work based on your previous document until a decision is made, right? Maybe that decision might not be made for quite a few months, and you would have lost out on your opportunity to work, while waiting for it or study. Secondly, when you have your visa, if it's applicable to you, okay? So don't travel without a visa unless you're going to the States and you have the valid work permit study permit. That's great. If you're traveling outside of the States and you want to come back, you wouldn't be allowed to come back without the visa. You can't just come back with your work permit or study permit. Finally, IRCC does strongly recommend that you file for your extension, even if you don't have implied status, even if your status is still okay. Let's say you're finished your studies, you can get your postgrad work permit. You don't have to, but it's strongly recommended that you go and apply for your postgrad work permit, and then you leave. And when you come back, when the officer, CBSA officer, if they check and say, hey, you're no longer a student, but you're coming back in a study permit, what are your intentions? And you say, oh, officer, I've already applied for my postgrad work permit. And then they say, okay, I understand. You've applied for your postgrad work permit. Whereas if you went and you didn't have anything, you say, well, I've graduated. So they said, well, you're not a student anymore. So then what's your purpose in Canada? So there could be a lot more questions at the border. All right. Well, today was a little bit short and sweet, so we have plenty of time for questions. But I just wanted to let you guys know that if you come to the webinar, please let us know that you've come to the webinar if you want to book for a consultation, because we always offer Devant webinar attendees the discounted fee, about only $100 plus tax. And yeah, and we can certainly go over your situation and figure out your personal plan. All
Thank
right.
you so much, Elizabeth. That was very important information. I know it was a lot to take in, everyone, but now you have an opportunity to ask your specific questions. I see someone asked a question. I know you covered this. I'll go to that one first. Basically, just to make sure they understand. So someone's saying, if I've applied for my postgrad work permit, but IRCC gave me a letter that I can work until March the 9th, or until they take a decision. If it did not arrive by March 9th, what could I do?
That's right. That's why I said the first stage. You
Mhm.
continue to work as long as you have not left the country, you have status until a decision is made. Now, right after I do this, I'm going to be sending out an email to our people on our email list. For everyone who's registered, we will be adding you guys to our email list. And we're going to send out an email advising everybody on our email list what I just told you guys about the extension letter, because it is so confusing. Recently, IRCC did something even more confusing in that they sent out an email. They're trying to be helpful. God love them. They really do try to be helpful. So then I sent another email saying, hey, everybody, you actually have another 180 days. Don't worry, you have another 180 days after this. Now, do they have another 180 days? They have as long as they want. You guys have as long as you want, as long as the decision has not been made. Okay? So the law is as long as the decision has not been made, it's there. Now, it's very confusing for employers. That's why we're going to send out an email to everyone on our email listserv. Or not listserv, email list, so that you can also pass it along to your employers as well.
Yeah, that's a great point, Elizabeth. And I'm just wondering, maybe we should do a session for employers next, and invite everyone's employers to attend. Because again, if if the students and newcomers are confused, the employers are likely confused as well. Because you gave some good information about the SIN number. I see a lot of questions around spouses, so I'm going to go here to this question, who says that I'm an international student and I'm taking a 2-year program. I will graduate with 3 years of a Canadian postgraduate work permit, but my spouse is not in Canada and his application for his open work permit has been rejected twice. Is it possible when I apply for my 3-year open work visa, my postgrad work permit, could I add his name? And if we apply together, will my visa get affected as well?
Right. So I would want to have you come for a consult. First of all, I'd want to see why his application was rejected, and perhaps we can look at ways that we might be able to, have this bolster the application if he actually qualifies. But the question that I would have is whether or not he would qualify, because you see, and we talked about this in the last session, which you can find on the Devant YouTube channel. There have been new developments with regard to the uh, spousal work permits just very recently. So now in order for your spouses to qualify for a spousal work permit, when you apply for the postgrad work permit, or if you have a postgrad work permit, you have to have either a tier 0 or 1 job, or if it's a tier 2 or 3, there's only very selected occupations that qualify. And also your work permit has to be at least 18 months. Okay, so
Wow.
those are some new things. So it depends on your job offer. And also the final thing is, if you are applying inside Canada, then you can't just have someone who is applying outside of Canada added to your application. If someone is applying inside Canada, everybody has to be inside Canada. So normally in these situations, we might apply for you first as a work permit inside Canada, and then we will look at someone who, if their spouse, if they qualify, to then submit their application outside. But these are all sort of hypothetical situations. I don't
Yes.
want to say this is definitive for your situation. I'd have to meet with you and understand your situation a little bit.
So please contact Elizabeth. Her email is here, and set up a consultation. I also have another spousal question, a simpler one. Does my husband have to stop working too after my letter of completion comes out?
That's a very good question. And the answer is not if your husband's spousal work permit has not yet expired. So, the student status, it expires 90 days after you've stopped studying. Now, if you completed your study, it stops 90 days. But that doesn't mean that your spouse's work permit, even though they got it because you got your study permit, their work permit is valid until the actual expiry date on their work permit. So they can continue to work until a decision is made on until their work permit expires. If they file an extension of their work permit, they have implied status. They can continue to work until a decision is made on their application.
Hmm. So again, I really encourage you guys to reach out to Elizabeth to take a look at your personal circumstances, because it could have unique details that she needs to see. I have another question here for you. I'm
Yeah,
under
sorry,
postgrad work.
Sisha,
Yep.
I wanted to sort of to interrupt you,
No,
but
go
I
ahead.
just want to add, you might see when I'm talking about implied status, restoration of status, all of these things, that a lot of timing is in play. Sometimes you want things done really fast, right? We all want decisions done really fast, don't we? No. Sometimes we don't want decisions to be fast. We want to drag out the decision as long as possible because we need certain things done. So, for example, I applying for a spousal work permit. I don't have a job yet. I might want to drag it out as long as possible because I want some time to find a job, in order for my spouse to. So a lot of these kind of things, we play around with the timing, and we have to see. It's not necessarily that you want to apply immediately when you qualify. Okay,
Mhm.
so come and we'll figure things out for you guys.
I'm also thinking that it could be to their benefit if it's taking longer, that if they're working and they have more Canadian experience, maybe they could then be qualified under a different class to apply if they've had enough qualified Canadian experience as well. So definitely really good point around the timing, Elizabeth. Thanks for sharing that. Okay, so someone here is asking, I'm under the postgrad work permit and considering to apply for common law sponsorship instead of Canadian class experience. I'm seeking clarification regarding the potential implications for a sponsor who signs an immigration undertaking. Specifically, if a sponsor signs the undertaking, will it have any impact on their assets or properties? Could their financial or legal standing be affected in any way by this commitment?
Um, we have to do a whole segment on families. Didn't we do one? I've done so many now. I'm
Yeah,
getting
I don't know what were you going to say? What type of
family
topic?
sponsorship. Did we do one? I feel like or if
Maybe
we
many years. It's probably a good one to try
yes,
to bring back.
yes,
Yes.
we definitely need to. Maybe we can do one next time,
Okay.
or yeah,
Okay.
because the family sponsorships are a very different kind of consideration. As a sponsor, yes, your spouse would have legal obligations in that if you access social welfare services, then the government could, within 3 years of you becoming permanent residents, then the government could ask, not just ask, they would get the funds from your husband and have him pay them back. So there are certain obligations for sponsors that they need to be aware of. But, in these days, when there's such a high competition for the very few spots for economic immigration, that if you do have a spouse, whether it's common law or married, who could sponsor you, sometimes that becomes the, if not the best, the only way for you to get permanent residence and stay together. So yeah, so I think that's a very important topic that we should definitely take some time to go over.
Okay, I'm going to add that to our list for the next time.
Yeah,
So I'm going to move to the next question. Someone said, what is the difference between ETA and TRV?
right. So ETA, Electronic Travel Authorization, ETA, is for people from non-visa requiring countries. Okay. The TRV, the temporary resident visa, is for people from visa requiring countries. So it's all about your nationality. Which passport do you hold? Now, if you hold two and one of them is non-visa requiring, one of them visa requiring, you use the non-visa requiring and you're fine, okay? But if you only have one and it's from a visa requiring country, then you need to get your visa. If you're from a non-visa requiring country, you can apply for your ETA unless you're American. American, you don't even need any of these. You just need your passport. And of course, the legal authorization when you come to the border to enter the country.
Okay, thank you. This question, I think I'm going to ask this person also to follow up with you, Elizabeth, but it says I'm an international student and will be completing my program in April of 2025. I'm planning to apply for my postgrad work permit by May and include my husband as his work permit will expire in June 2nd. Is it fine if I will include him already, even if I don't have a tier 1 job required by our IRCC? Can he receive an implied status letter too for him to continue working?
So, number one, the implied status letter does not give him authorization to work. The mere fact of applying for his work permit before it expires gives him the authorization to work. Okay, the letter does not give you authorization. The letter is something that the government gives to kind of, help you show different people, but it does not issue any authorization for someone to work. This is a situation where we need to play with timing. So you don't want to apply for your husband's work permit extension too early, because you apply for it too early and you don't have a job by the time officer gets to the application, then your husband's work permit will likely be rejected. Okay, so come for a consultation and we will figure out the best way to help you and your husband continue and be able to support yourselves in Canada.
Okay, thank you. I have another implied status question since we're on that topic. Can I apply for any PR pathway with implied status?
It really depends on the application. Most will be because it is legal status, but I'll have to take a look at your situation.
Okay. So we've got someone here who's talking about traveling. So let's go to that because that was our topic. I plan to travel outside of Canada after I apply for my postgrad work permit. Can I return once my postgrad work permit is approved? Can I return if my postgrad work permit is still pending a decision and our student visa is still valid? I think you've gone through this already, Elizabeth. So what I would say is you will get a copy of the video because you're here, whoever asked that question, and she's already sort of answered that. So I'm going to move on to a different question. Should I apply for restoration of status, assuming that I'm still on implied status and my visa is near expiration and the decision has not yet been made?
No, you don't apply for restoration of status if you have not lost your status. Restoration of status is only to restore your status. You can't restore if you haven't lost it, okay? So the restoration, if you have lost your status, then you can apply to restore your status.
Okay. So thank you. This is an interesting one. I'm an international student from a private college. My boss is willing to help me get a work permit, but my job, which is a server supervisor, is not on the list of the jobs or professions that qualifies for a work permit. Is it still possible to do it?
You have to qualify for a work permit in order to get a work permit. Now, whether or not you can, that's a question. It may be difficult. We may not be able to get an LMIA for a server supervisor, but if you are in one of the IEC countries, maybe you might be able to get a working holiday work permit or young professionals work permit. If you can speak French, we might be able to get you a francophone work permit. So there are different things that we might consider to see if there is any way for you to get a work permit.
Interesting. So please follow up with Elizabeth to take a look at your full options. Someone's asking, what is LMIA?
LMIA is called Labor Market Impact Assessment. We talked a little bit about that in the last session, a few couple of weeks ago. And it's basically something that the default for most work permits is LMIA, where the employer has to show they cannot find a Canadian to do the job. For many of you, if your post-grad work permit is going to expire, the LMIA-based work permit may be your only option. Now, there are all kinds of work permits out there. For a lot of you, there may be other options. But just keep in mind that extending a work permit is not a right. It's not, most of the time, it's not like, when can I submit the extension? Or how can I submit the extension? Can I submit the extension? Can I qualify for it? And so this is something that many of you need to consider, because right now we have well over 2.3 million people who are in Canada with study permits and work permits. And each year the government is only going to allow probably around 200,000 get permanent residence. So for many of you, your work permits may expire before you can get permanent residence. You need to figure out as early as possible how you might be able to extend your work permit if you don't get permanent residence before your work permit expires.
Wow, that's really good information, Elizabeth. That hits home. Thank you for giving us those statistics. I have more questions coming in. I have a question from someone about Quebec. Someone says, I'm on a 1-year co-op program and I started in September. I was thinking of applying to the Quebec experience program after the program was over. But on the website, it says that applications will not be accepted after October 31st. Does this affect those who started training before October?
Quebec is the only province that I do not do the permanent residence applications for, because Quebec has its own sort of situation. I will say from getting a lot of referrals from my colleagues in Quebec for people who want to get permanent residence, it can be very much longer and more tedious, and sometimes impossible, especially if you don't speak French, to go through the Quebec permanent residence programs than compared to the rest of Canada. So in Canada, if you wanted to go through federal programs like Express Entry, you cannot show that you intend to live in Quebec afterwards, because you will not be allowed to apply under those programs. So for those of you who really, really, really want to stay in Quebec and you don't want to go to the rest of Canada, I would highly recommend that you go to a Quebec based lawyer who can then advise you on the Quebec programs.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Elizabeth. When you say 18 months valid, does it mean we have to wait for the postgrad work permit approval, which is 3 years permit, before we can apply for our SOWP extension?
See, this is something that the website is a little bit confusing. Now, these policies just came out a few weeks ago. My reading of it is that if someone's work permit, and this has been the case from from the beginning, that if you get issued, and you apply together, and you get issued your work permit for 3 years, and you have that job offer that qualifies, then your spouse should also get their work permit issued together. Now, your spouse can't apply for their work permit before you get your work permit, but I'm not 100% because this new policy just came into place, but it just does not make sense that they would require a family member to apply for their work permit after the principal worker's application, because that could very well mean that the family member loses their status. So I would normally still apply for both together.
Okay, thank you. Okay, when extending your study permit, is it okay to mention the intention to work after studying? Should my study visa also be extended simultaneously, or can the visa be extended after getting the postgrad work permit?
You don't, this is a little bit confusing because if someone wants to extend their study permit, then should a study visa be extended after getting the postgrad work permit? So your visa, sometimes people get study visa and study permits confused, and I have a feeling this is a little confusing for me. So a
Yes.
visa is something that is for traveling, okay? It's called a temporary resident visa. And it could be because you have a study permit, or it could be because you have a work permit. But you don't extend your visa normally until you have a valid study permit or work permit inside Canada. So normally what happens is, let's say you're studying. Okay, great. You finish, and let's say you want to travel. You need to extend your study permit. Okay, I need to extend my study permit. I've gotten my new study permit. Now I need to travel, and my study permit, I'm not going to finish studying until maybe a year or two later. Okay, then I'm going to apply to extend my visa. Let's say I've graduated. Now I want to, now my visa is going to expire because I can't travel, and I'm applying for my postgrad work permit. So then you apply for your postgrad work permit, get your postgrad work permit, then you apply for your visa that's going to be based on the length of time of your work permit. So then your new visa should be good for at least 3 years. Then you can travel based on that.
Okay. Thank you. This is a new question. For the 1+1 program, someone told me that we're not allowed to have the postgrad work permit. Is that true?
No. The one, and again, watch the session that we had last time because we addressed this. This is the new rules is that if you apply for your study permit for a program after November 1st of last year, if you are doing a non-degree program, let's say you're doing a college program for 1 year, okay? That new program also now needs to meet the field of study requirements. So you've done a 1-year program before, and now you want to do another 1-year program. So now you have to get a new study permit. And that new program must meet the field of study requirement. So if your new program, for example, is in the field of like, let's say nursing, okay, and it's one of the field of study program. Okay, great. Then I do another 1-year program. and I can still get the postgrad work permit. But let's say this 1-year program is in something business and it's not a field of study. Well, if I did another 1-year program, I don't qualify at all for a postgrad work permit because second program does not meet the field of study.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. I just also started a poll there for those of you who have been listening to the session. Would love your feedback. More questions are coming in. Someone asked about the requirements for the postgrad work permit. Person is graduating in May, but I think you've already talked about postgrad work permit. I'm gonna sort of say that you can get the recording as well. I'm just trying to see which questions we have not addressed. What happens if my extension of my study permit is rejected, but I still want to stay in Canada? Would I have to apply for a new study permit or do an application for restoration of status?
Mhm. Well, number one, we'd have to figure out why it was rejected. And if your extension was rejected or any application is rejected, do not wait to seek counsel because you only have 15 days to go to the federal court if you needed to contest the decision and ask for judicial review. There is also very limited time to file the restoration of status. Okay. If you file a new study permit, you won't be able to, at a visa post, you won't be able to stay in Canada. But if you file the restoration of status within Canada, then you can stay in Canada until a decision is made. So we need to take a look at your situation. Why was it rejected? You know, if you file to do the same thing again and again and just keeps rejecting over and over again, that's no good. Okay. And by the way, when you file the restoration of status, can you study or work while waiting for a decision? No, you cannot. That is the big difference between waiting for something that's on restoration of status and implied status, applying for something while you still have status. If you are on implied status, you can work or study. If your status has been rejected or you lost your status and you're applying to restore your status, you might be able to stay in Canada to wait until the decision is made, but you do not have the right to work or study until a decision is made. So you have to just stay, do nothing, do no work, no study until a decision is made.
Thank you. You just answered one of the questions that was on here that I'm going to bypass because you just answered that. What if someone has received their postgrad work permit and they're planning to travel outside of Canada temporarily? However, they have not applied to extend their spouse's open work permit as they do not have a current job in NOC 01 or 2. Is my spouse allowed to remain in Canada while I am traveling, even though their work permit has not been extended?
Yeah, your spouse, their status is their status. Your status is your status. Okay. Your spouse's work permit is good until it expires. If they want to file their extension, they can file it. If they're on implied status, then they have to stay in Canada. Okay. So their status is their status. Your status is your status. We can certainly take a look at how to best structure everything. But yeah, they're a different person from you.
Okay. Great answer. Thank you. I see some questions about like US, Canada, and is it okay for people to travel to the States legally? Do you want to say anything about that? I know you've mentioned already about the US, Canada traveling.
Yeah, so you to go to the States, that's not Canadian jurisdiction. To go to the States, if you want to go to the States, you say, "Can I travel to the States?" That depends on your US visa, your US situation. I'm not a US immigration attorney, so go and ask a US attorney as to whether or not you can travel to the States. But if you want to return back from the States, let's say you have your US visa. Now you want to know, can I come back to Canada? That's my jurisdiction. So when you want to come back to Canada, if you're just going to the States and you have a valid work permit or study permit, you're only going to the States, you're not going to any other country. You can come back even if you don't have a visa.
Okay, good to know. Good to know. Thank you. Um, So what happens, I think you've already answered this, so, what happens if the study permit is rejected, but they still want to stay in Canada? Do I have to apply for a new study permit? I think we've already answered this. So again, please look at the recording. We are going to move because there's just so many questions here. I'm just trying to get through any new
I would
ones.
say let's do two more questions and then
Yes, gotta wrap up. Yeah, there's lots here. I see a lot of personal questions. I'm going to recommend you follow up with Elizabeth, please, for your specific scenarios. I guess someone's asking, like, does their current job title give them other options for an extension other than what we've already discussed?
there are all sorts of different work permits, types of work permits to apply for. We did a few of those, I think a couple of months ago, late last year, about different kinds of work permits that you can get. So you can look into some of those webinars, or better yet, just come for a consult. We'll go over your situation and tell you what works for you.
Sounds good. Well, I think for the rest of the questions, they're really personal questions for everyone's circumstances. Again, there are some questions here about French, and Elizabeth answered as well about her area of jurisdiction is not in Quebec. But also for those of you who have questions, some of these were already answered in her presentation. So at this moment, I'm wondering if you could go back to our slides. Thank you guys so much for sharing your feedback and very high scores. Very happy to see that 4 and 5 stars. Please give a big round of applause for Elizabeth for spending her evening with us. Please continue learning with us. Next week, we have another session. It's actually going to be changed to a career coaching session. March 12th, we have LinkedIn profile. Oh, I see lots of claps for you, Elizabeth. Thank you guys so much. And we've got career coaching as well on March 19th, and then the follow-up session on March 26th. I think, Elizabeth, maybe family sponsorships, we can come
Sure.
back. It seems to be a lot of questions around spousals, family. There was another question around timelines. Please check the IRCC website around timelines. So March 26th, we'll talk again, but it looks like that's an important topic. So we'll sort of earmark family sponsorships for March 26th. Next slide, please. Again, through Devon, just a reminder, in addition, obviously go to your career center first. You're not-for-profit as well. You've got free resources and coaching available to you. If you need extra support, Devon does offer paid coaching services, LinkedIn profile audits, and resume and cover letter writing. And for those of you who are part of the Devon schools or universities and colleges, you can check the login page and you get free access to 24/7 resume and mock interview tools. Next slide, please. Finally, we do have a quick service for you to get a free understanding of what your score is through Improved. You can try it for free, and please make sure you follow up with a lawyer like Elizabeth to have a one-on-one consultation. And I think that is it. Wonderful. Thank you guys so much for joining. I hope you found it helpful. I can see that you have by the ratings. Elizabeth, again, thank you so much. Looking forward to seeing you on the 26th of March.
Always great to be here. Take care, everyone. Have a great night.
You're welcome. Thank you. Bye, everyone.